I'm Thomas, the creative director at Bellular Studios and on The Pale Beyond, and today we're going to be talking about the game's score and the audio design of The Pale Beyond.
At the beginning of the project, I was afforded the gift, I suppose, of having time to experiment, both in terms of the sound design and with the music, which is a great privilege, to be honest, coming from freelancing on other gigs before joining Bellular. One of the things that comes at a premium is time. One of the really interesting things about the process of research was whenever reading the Endurance, these incredibly vivid descriptions, and quite alien descriptions, of the sound of the ice moving both against the hull and under people's feet. You know, it's described as a steam train passing or a woman screaming. And whenever I moved the research to looking at field recordings, largely done by the BBC from the BBC archive, ranging all the way back to the 70s and up till pretty much yesterday, I guess. I almost didn't expect it to actually sound like that, especially in a book like Endurance, where it feels almost like it's too extreme. Like you're reading it and you're like, wow, if this was fiction, somebody would have told them, no, this is too much, you know, this is too extreme, this is beyond reality. But when plundering the BBC archives for reference material, the sounds were true to life as the descriptions were in the book. Because another part of the research was going out and capturing field recordings myself, which I suppose brought up one of the first challenges of trying to create realistic atmospheres based off of field recordings whilst living in Northern Ireland, which unfortunately lacks any glaciers of any kind, which meant it was somewhat of a challenge. You know, there's no trees on the ice. There's certainly no gorgeous open meadows or anything like that. And there's definitely no traffic. And so you very quickly become conscious of the constant din of like civilization and society. And on the ice, that it's devoid of that. There's nothing at all. You know, it's almost what you would imagine silence to be. But in an interesting way, as the research progressed further, again, a lot of this comes from a mixture of the field recordings I captured and then referencing those against BBC archive stuff, discovering that what we imagine to be silence is actually deafeningly loud. You know, the ice does sound like those descriptions, to the point where it sounds alien. It does sound like a steam train going by. It does sound like mountains collapsing in on themselves, which was both, I think, exciting from a sound designer's perspective, but also presented lots of those challenges, because that stuff, it ended up that being in a position where I knew what I wanted to achieve, but also being conscious that I had to build a lot of the soundscapes from scratch. I mean, luckily we live in a modern world where we have access to the internet, and so I had access to things like the BBC archive, and even resources like freesound.org, which, for those that don't know, is a really vibrant community of sound recordists and sort of field recordists. And I can't recommend enough anybody that's even has a passing interest in audio, just go on and listen to the weird things that people capture. That gave me access to locations that I just wouldn't have the opportunity to go and capture, you know. Especially whenever it came to a lot of the ocean and shore capturing stuff, because I was able to capture a lot of shore here. But again, the challenge is that, you know, we have really vibrant, busy shipping ways here on the coast of Ireland. And so being able to capture really clean, open ocean was a little bit of a challenge. So having access to those resources was wonderful. Generally, whenever I'm building sounds from scratch, I'll work in a vertical fashion, building up the different layers. So it's getting a little bit from each sound and building up the layers so that you're able to put specific stuff in a space. At the end of the day, I suppose what I'm attempting to do is create a situation where the player is immersed without noticing it. We've talked about it quite a lot as a team, and it's something that me and Thomas talked about ad nauseum really at the start of the project, was the idea that really good sound design isn't mentioned by the audience. You know, they take it as read that this is the place that they are, that they're immersed in the location, and it's not distracting, you know. I suppose there was two main approaches I wanted to look at whenever it came to the music. The first was what I would call mood music, and it references things like Cage and Nils Fram and Max Cooper, even stuff like Sun O, you know. It's almost like the white for your canvas, you know. It's not telling you how to feel, it's not dictating the color of a space, but rather it's allowing you to imprint and reflect how you feel about a thing to it. And I felt like conceptually that felt good as an artist when I was thinking about that, in terms of speaking to the way that the ice is, you know. Like one of our pillars of design was that the ice doesn't care that you're there. And so it felt like having elements of the music be free from melody almost, and they'd be more harmonically focused, sort of arpeggiated lines, and a lot of drone material. I guess I wanted the mood music to reflect the feeling the ice would give you, you know, that it's huge and it's expansive, but it works in its own rhythms, you know, it's not intrinsically linked to the actions of the player. The flip side of that was there was an opportunity to have these melody forward moments that I wanted to be intrinsically linked to these set piece moments within the narrative, and that could be these moments that the player would remember. I come from a performance background and was a percussionist with various groups for a long time. And in my early 20s had this realization moment where I'd always thought, definitely arrogantly, that as the drummer performing, everybody in the room's tapping their feet to me, to what I'm doing. You know, I'm the meter, I'm you know, dictating the tempo and the feel. But it was realizing when I was younger that whenever people go home and they're making their dinner or they're lying in bed thinking about the show, their memories are attached to the melody. That's the important bit, that's the emotional part. And so I wanted to be able to reflect that, I think, in our important moments in the narrative. So it allowed me to, I guess, I want to say plunder, the depths of some of the film scores that I really love from the 50s and 60s. Miklos Rosa wrote mind-blowingly beautiful score for 1959's Ben-Hur. And it's huge and it's sweeping and it's romantic, and it makes you feel all the feelings. And it manages to be tender and gentle and huge and high octane all at once. And it's all about melody, that's the whole point, you know, and he keeps returning to these same melodies, just with little twists depending on the setting or the moment that's happening in the movie. And that's something I kind of wanted. I guess, you know, I think like any person creating anything, you have this imagined version of how the audience is going to take it. And you have to hope for the best, I think, in those moments. But for me, I wanted to create memorable moments. And in an interesting way, this is something we laugh about quite a lot. I used the Old Grey Whistle test, which is a thing from Abbey Road, kind of back in the day, where mix engineers, after they'd been working on a session with a band or a group or a singer during the day, in the evening they would be running the tape out and they'd be playing stuff back, and the cleaners would be in and they'd be sort of sweeping up and sort of, you know, doing whatever in the hallways or whatever. And so the Old Grey Whistle test was if the mix engineers would catch or hear the cleaners whistling or humming a melody, they knew they were onto something good. You know, they knew it was memorable. They knew that it was important in some way. And so interestingly, I think, as a person that spends quite a lot of their time working solo, having the opportunity to come in and work with a team on a more regular basis, I was able to sneakily do that. I would always know if I'm on to the right track, if at lunch I would hear somebody walking past humming something that I'd written a couple of weeks previous, you know. With the initial experimentation with the music, I think one of the hardest things to do is to not be married to what you're working on. Because at the end of the day, we're working on a multidisciplinary project, and the end goal is to be able to bring the best possible thing that works best in conjunction with the art and the narrative, and indeed the mechanics, to be able to immerse the player and immerse the audience in the thing that we're making, that shared goal of making the best possible version of the whole, rather than being like, this is a musical-led thing, you know. And so my initial experiments, I started off with a lot of drone stuff. Again, this is kind of reflecting the idea of this kind of glacial wasteland back at the player. And over time, it became quite apparent that it needed a little more rather than just this kind of like empty space. And so I kept coming back to the piano, which is familiar, I think, for everybody to a certain degree. You know, even if you don't play, everybody's heard a piano. You can imagine it in a space, you know what it looks like. And so as a grounding element, I think that worked really effectively. And of course, like the initial experiments, it's something I talk about, I think, too much, but your first idea, you're always married to because it's exciting. But it's your second and third idea that's good. It allows the first idea to be reflected on. It gives you time to learn from it. And I think that's why I felt so privileged to have that time to experiment right at the start of the project. Because that allowed space to get to the second and third idea.
In the Werner Herzog documentary, Encounters at the End of the World, there's this amazing sequence where they dive under the ice and they sort of see underwater, but they see the ice flows from below, and it's set to this sort of amazing, angelic kind of choral, almost churchy score music. And that, in accordance with some of the original, in the very classical sense, awesome descriptions of the ice, really led us down this path early in the audio development of wanting to kind of exemplify that religiosity in the game's score and in some of the sort of foundational audio design, and that led us to the organ as an instrument.
One of the things that became quite apparent early on was that we were in love with the sound of the organ. It's so representative of the cultural and spiritual heaviness of the idea of putting all of these disparate peoples on the ice with this shared goal, you know.
So in a stroke of luck, earlier in development, just before we started full production, I was scrolling through social media and I found that there was a church in East Belfast that was downsizing and being converted into a theatre, and they needed to get rid of this old, amazing church organ. And of course, I saw this, and the first thing I did was message James, and went, James, there's a church organ, it's free, should we get this? And naturally, James immediately said, yes. So we went on a quest, and we made our way out into East Belfast to this wonderful church, and proceeded to look at this organ and then try to devise a way to get it into James's rehearsal studio. I remember walking into the church and seeing James immediately hit it off with the rector, and James takes one look at the organ and immediately diagnoses, oh no, this organ is actually a reprint of this specific brand of organ from like the 1970s or something. And then maybe like, oh yeah, James knows a lot about organs, more than I thought he originally did. Okay, great, yep, let's do it. So we had the organ. The only problem was we needed to move it, and our original transport had actually just cancelled at the last minute. And we only found out that they had cancelled it after we had moved the organ outside of the church and we were on the pavement. So we had to ring every van person that we could find in Belfast until we found one who completely saved us.
We were introduced to a really interesting guy, Adrian, and through much sweat and swearing, we managed to load this literal 1.5 ton block of wood into the back of a van, which then we transported up to my drum room on the other side of town, which nearly put me in traction, I'm not gonna lie. But it's interesting suddenly having access to the physical object. It just immediately opens your mind to the possibilities of the sounds that could be made. You know, it's immediately characterful, it's noisy, it's creaky, it's slightly out of tune. But I think that adds to the character and the flavor of the whole thing. Also, it's nice knowing that it's real. It's not a sampled instrument that somebody else can just lift off the shelf and use, you know. It's ours. And I think that, or well, I hope that that comes across.
It's featured very heavily in the game's score, and I'm really happy with how it's sort of fed into everything else and reinformed other elements of the sound design.
Organ's often referred to as the voice of God, you know, in a cathedral setting, and So there's something about that grandness that we really wanted to get across. Now, I should say, like, I'm definitely not an organist by any stretch, but the thing that fascinated me the most about it, I think it's one of the things that excited Thomas as well, which is why we were so excited to use it and experiment with it, is that it can make some unholy noises. All of it's full spectrum, almost in the same way that the accordion would be, which I'll get to in a minute, but it can give you all of those crazy low-end subs, and it's full and it's rich, but also it can be a melody-forward instrument as well as being sort of cacophonous and low and filling the whole space. You know, like when you look at it in a church setting, the organ is essentially the room. The room is the amplifier for it. The other thing about the organ is that it is profoundly physical to play. It's a four-limbed instrument to, you know, constantly working stops, constantly working your feet. The physical nature of that and the way that it imparts little noises made the drone material that ended up being the bed for a lot of the piano stuff that came later. It gave that an individual and a physical quality that I think, and an organic quality as well, that I think was quite effective, especially whenever we're considering the fact that the ice is constantly shifting and moving in a similar way.
Yeah, so earlier it was, I think, the original Gamescom build of Pale. We decided early on that we wanted one of the cast members to play a musical instrument specifically. I believe on the Shackleton expedition it was a banjo, and the guy only knew 6 songs, much to the sort of chagrin of everyone else on the expedition. But I was looking at other instruments we could potentially introduce, and I personally had been following this amazing musician and Twitch streamer, Jackson Prody, for the last couple of years. He does amazing video game covers and loads of amazing original music. And I messaged him and I told him what I thought, which was his video game covers are amazing, but I just adored his original music that is sort of embedded in his YouTube channel. And he responded, and we got talking. And he's he's got this amazing he's got an amazing audio setup. So whenever you speak to him over Discord, it sounds like you're speaking to the radio. He's great. But yeah, we got chatting. I showed him the game, and he was interested. And yeah, as soon as we first started to put some of his original accordion music in to the game, I think it was initially the boiler trouble scene in the game's prologue. There's something about the juxtaposition between that instrument and the life and death sort of oppressive tension of the setting and the situation that just like clicked, and it just instantly got across this kind of mixture of tones that we really wanted the Pale Beyond to be.
It's like all of our ideas coalesced and crystallized in that moment. And it became really apparent that not only the easiest, but the most exciting approach for us, not only from a composer's perspective, but as a team at large, was to have somebody specialized come in and do that specific part and bring their voice to it, bring their approach to it. I was introduced, obviously digitally, to Jackson because he lives in Florida. And I'm going to gush just for a moment because he's a consummate professional, always delivered exciting and interesting things, really easy to work with, and you should definitely hire him for your gig. But the other thing that was really interesting about working with him was I didn't really expect to fall in love with the accordion of all instruments so deeply. It's like a full spectrum instrument, you know, it does almost in the same way that the organ does. It covers all those beautiful round sub-frequencies. It has this really present, rich mid-range and this kind of really reedy top end. So that was just a joy to mix and to work with as a source. But I mean, in addition to that, it's just a pleasure to always work with anybody that is talented and is a professional. Yeah, so we wanted to give a bit more voice to the crew, I think. Musically, because we had the accordion stuff, which not only gave character specifically to Grimly, but also I think spoke a little bit to the nature of folk music. There's a lot of full orchestral arrangements in the music for Pale as a whole. And certainly in the time period that we're alluding to, I think that full orchestral arrangements would be kind of they'd be specifically designed for the middle to upper class, I guess, to a certain degree. Just certainly in the time period that we're trying to reference. And so being able to include something that is closer to folk instrumentation was quite important. The other key part, of course, of folk music is the voice, and it was something that was kind of lacking overall from all of the music. So initially we'd thought that we would just have the accompaniment of the accordion working with a text overlay in game. But we decided to take a gamble, sort of just for fun initially, to record some vocals. So we started with Ethan. And the results were effective and pleasing enough that we decided to record a plethora of different voices from people around the office. It ended up being quite a surprisingly touching and special moment in game, which led to us experimenting with doing it more later on. I think one of the most important and special things about the whole project for me was being able to come to work and be humbled every day. I think it's difficult to push yourself to make something special and vibrant and important, something vital, because you have to put a part of yourself in it. But I think whenever you're surrounded by a group of people that you can see every day are putting themselves and so much of themselves into the thing that they're making, it actually makes it easy, you know? So I really hope that that comes across to everybody that gets to hear and see and play what we've made. And I hope that they fall in love with it as much as we have.
Thanks for listening to the episode on audio design. If you're interested in hearing any more of the music, you can also check out the game's soundtrack online and on Steam. Cheers.